Have you ever been on a flight where nothing felt out of the ordinary, where passengers quietly read their books, adjusted their headphones, or drifted into sleep, until a single announcement changed everything? This isn't a story about turbulence or delays, but about one woman sitting quietly in row 10, unnoticed by almost everyone, until fate forced her into the spotlight. By the end of this, you'll see why her silence carried more weight than words, and why the captain's desperate call, "Are there any combat pilots here?" brought her to her feet. Stay with me until the end, and before we take off with this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more gripping tales you won't want to miss. The flight from Dallas to Seattle was routine, a typical evening departure with the golden sun painting the sky outside. Passengers shuffled on board, some carrying laptops, some cradling tired children, others already drowsy after long workdays. In seat 10A, by the window, sat a woman in her late 30s, her hair tied back in a simple braid, a well-worn denim jacket pulled snugly around her shoulders. To most, she looked like any other traveler, quiet, composed, someone you wouldn't notice twice. She sipped water, tucked her bag beneath the seat, and stared absently out the window at the tarmac lights. But beneath that calm exterior was a life few could imagine. Her name was Catherine Hayes, though most who knew her in her old life had never called her by that name. To them, she had been Valkyrie, a decorated combat pilot with missions etched into military history, though most of those missions would never be spoken about publicly. Years ago, she had walked away from the Air Force, trading the roar of engines and the hum of battlefields for quiet, civilian anonymity. She had promised herself she would never step back into that world. And yet, the sky had a way of calling people home. An hour into the flight, somewhere over the Rocky Mountains, the cabin was peaceful. The overhead lights dimmed, the hum of the engines steady. Then the peace shattered. The intercom buzzed with urgency, the captain's voice strained and rushed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing a critical situation. If there are any licensed pilots or combat pilots on board, please make yourselves known immediately." The words fell like thunder. Passengers gasped, glanced around in panic. Some muttered prayers, others whispered, "What's happening?" A baby cried in the back. No one moved. The attendants stood frozen, eyes darting nervously toward the cockpit. And in row 10, Catherine's fingers clenched into fists. She closed her eyes, her heart pounding. She had wanted so badly to leave that part of her life behind, but she could feel it. This was her call. She stood, slowly, quietly, but with a resolve that filled the aisle. The flight attendant's eyes widened as she approached. "I'm a combat pilot," she said simply. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of command. The attendants ushered her toward the cockpit without hesitation, their relief almost palpable. Inside, the scene was chaos. The captain, drenched in sweat, was slumped to one side, pale and barely conscious. The first officer's hands trembled as he tried to stabilize the aircraft, alarms blinking furiously across the dashboard. Catherine slid into the captain's seat with fluid precision, her movements confident, almost instinctual. "What's the situation?" she asked. The co-pilot, barely keeping composure, explained. The captain had suffered a cardiac emergency, the autopilot was glitching, and they were losing altitude faster than expected. Catherine's hands flew over the controls like second nature. "I've got it," she said firmly. The co-pilot stared, hesitant, but something in her tone left no room for doubt. The plane leveled. The alarms quieted. For the first time in 20 minutes, stability returned. Outside the cockpit, passengers whispered in confusion. "Who is she? Is she really a pilot? What's going on?" The attendants gave vague reassurances, but they themselves were watching in awe. Catherine radioed air traffic control. "This is Flight 271, ex-military combat pilot assuming command. Captain incapacitated. Aircraft stable for now. Request priority emergency landing." Her voice was calm, professional, unwavering. The controller on the other end paused. "Copy that. Valkyrie." The old call sign slipped out before he could stop himself. Catherine froze for half a second. Word traveled fast in the aviation world, and clearly someone on the other side of that frequency knew exactly who she was. She shook it off. "Yes, just guide me in." The descent was anything but simple. Storm clouds rolled over the mountains, lightning flashing dangerously close to the wings. Turbulence rattled the cabin. Gasps and screams echoed behind the cockpit door as the aircraft bucked violently. But Catherine's hands never shook. Every jolt, every shudder of the plane, she countered with precision honed through years of flying under fire. The co-pilot, watching her work, whispered, "You've done this before." She didn't answer, eyes locked on the instruments. In her mind, she wasn't in a passenger jet anymore. She was back in the desert skies, dodging missiles, guiding her squadron home. Every move she made carried the muscle memory of survival. As they neared Seattle, air traffic cleared every runway. Emergency crews lined the tarmac. News had already broken. A commercial flight in distress, its fate uncertain. Families in the city held their breath, waiting for the outcome. Inside the plane, tension reached its breaking point. A businessman clutched the armrest until his knuckles turned white. A mother whispered lullabies to her child, her own tears betraying her calm facade. The elderly couple in row 15 held hands, whispering prayers. And through it all, the woman from row 10 was their only lifeline. "Approach path locked," Catherine said, her voice steady. Flaps set, landing gear down. The wheels unfolded with a roar, the runway a thin silver ribbon in the stormy night. The co-pilot whispered, "God help us." Catherine corrected him softly. "Not God. Us." The plane touched down with a bone-shaking jolt. For a terrifying moment, the wheels skidded against the slick runway, fishtailing dangerously. Gasps filled the cabin. Then, with a controlled maneuver that only years of combat flying could teach, Catherine straightened the aircraft, slowing it to a steady roll. When the plane finally stopped, silence filled the cabin. Then, an eruption of cheers, applause, and tears. Passengers unbuckled, embracing strangers, weeping openly. The attendants sobbed with relief. And in the cockpit, Catherine leaned back, finally exhaling, her hands trembling now only because the danger had passed. When the doors opened, emergency crews rushed in. The captain was taken out on a stretcher, still alive thanks to quick response. But the true focus was on Catherine. The co-pilot whispered, almost reverently, "You saved us." She shook her head. "We saved each other." Outside, the storm had passed. Reporters swarmed, desperate for answers. Passengers tried to tell them about the woman in row 10, about how she had taken control and landed a plane when all seemed lost. But Catherine slipped quietly into the night, blending into the crowd, her denim jacket pulled tight against the rain. She didn't want recognition. She never did. To her, it was just duty. Yet the story spread. Pilots whispered her name in terminals. Veterans recognized her call sign in hushed conversations. She had tried to disappear, but heroes have a way of being found. And while the world may have seen just a passenger in row 10, those on board would forever remember her as Valkyrie, the woman who turned fear into hope and brought them home when no one else could. And that's why, sometimes, the quietest people among us carry the loudest stories. Stories of sacrifice, of courage, of skills earned in silence. Catherine Hayes didn't board that flight to be a hero. But when the captain asked if there were any combat pilots on board, fate made sure she was there to answer. If this story gave you chills, if it reminded you that heroes walk quietly among us, then don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories of courage, humanity, and moments that change everything.